Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah share. We're holding Mishnah Berurah Chelik Gimel Am Yetz Hashem. Today we will be learning Daf Kuf Pei Vav Amid Beis. We are continuing to learn Hilchos Shabbos. We pick up today on the second line down on Kuf Pei Vav Amid Beis, in the middle of Siman Shin Lamed Tes Sif Dalet. So here in Shin Lamed Tes, we've been discussing various things that you're not allowed to do on Shabbos. Like the Mechaber gave the title to the Siman, Kama dinim protiyam anohagin b'Shabbos. Many varied dinim that apply on Shabbos. I keep on calling it the miscellaneous siman. So here in Siv Daled, we've been discussing things that have to do with being done, things that have to do with mishpat, things that have to do with any form of bezdin activity that you're not allowed to do on Shabbos. And the primary overriding reason that we've been seeing is Gzeira Shema Yavai Likasev. You might come to right. That's something that's been covering a lot of the things that we've been saying you're not allowed to do. We did have also a din daraisa, which is that Bezdin is not allowed to mete out punishment on Shabbos. We learned that from Lo Yisavaru Eish B'chol Moishvei Sechem, where we have a Yerushalmi that says that extra pasuk, we don't need a specific pasuk by the Isser of Havara, of making a fire on Shabbos, but from that pasuk we learn out that Bezdin would not be allowed to mete out the punishment of Sreifa, which would involve burning. You're not allowed to do that on Shabbos, and so too Bezdin is not allowed to mete out any other form of punishment on Shabbos. But we've seen lots of other things that you're not allowed to do that involve any factor of din you're not allowed to do on Shabbos, and we continue on the same theme today. Second line down, Kuf Pei Vav Amid Beis, says the Mechaber, V'loi Choltzin. You're not allowed to perform chalitza on Shabbos. Of course, what's chalitza? Chalitza, if a woman falls for yibum. What does that mean? A woman was married and her husband passed away, childless. So you have this couple, they were married, the husband died, there are no children. Midaraisa, the din is that this woman falls for yibum. The husband's brother is supposed to be miyabim her, supposed to marry her. But if he doesn't want to do yibum, then there's a procedure called chalitza, where the Torah describes that they have to go to Bezdin, the Yavama, the woman who fell for yibum, and her brother-in-law, they have to go to Bezdin, and they have to perform chalitza so that she should be allowed to marry somebody else. And the Mechaber tells us over here, like Choltzin, you're not allowed to perform chalitza on Shabbos. Now, there is no malacha of any kind that is involved in the performance of chalitza. What's the problem? Again, it's the same issue. This falls under the rubric of being dan, of bezdin activity. Says the Mishnah Berurah Katan Chaf, v'loi choltzin, and the problem is shema yichtov shtar chalitza lachalutza. After bezdin performs chalitza, they give the avama, they give the woman a document that attests to the fact that she had chalitza, and now she's allowed to marry another man. So we're afraid if they perform the chalitza on Shabbos, they might come to write the shtar chalitza. And continues the Mishnah Berurah, and he says, "Va'afil likbaya mokoim lachalitza aser." There's an interesting din when it comes to chalitza, and that is that chalitza requires kvius mokoim. When you want to perform a chalitza, one of the steps that has to be done is Bezdin has to establish a place for the chalitza. They have to be kveya mokoim, where the chalitza is going to take place. We actually learn this out from the pasuk, because the pasuk says, "Va'olsa yevimtai hasha'ora." She has to go to the shar ha'ir. It means to the makom mishpat. But Bezdin has to be kaveya a makom for the chalitza. Says the Mishnah Berurah, not only are you not allowed to perform chalitza on Shabbos, you're also not allowed to make this kvias makom. Bezdin is not allowed to get together on Shabbos and say, okay, we're being kaveya makom. Tomorrow we're performing the chalitza in room number 2 of the Bezdin offices. You're not allowed to be kaveya makom for the chalitza on Shabbos. Why? Shalo yeh nireh ki'ilu danin b'Shabbos. Because this would be a form of a Maisa Bezdin. Bezdin is getting together and doing something on Shabbos. It looks like you're being done on Shabbos, and you're not allowed to be done on Shabbos. Gzeira Shema Yikasev. Now, since the Mishnah Berurah has mentioned this halacha, that you cannot be kaveya a makom for the chalitza on Shabbos, now the Mishnah Berurah discusses, what if you want to perform a chalitza Sunday morning, and you want everything to be ready? Now you're telling me you can't be kaver makom on Shabbos. Okay, could you be kaver makom on Motzei Shabbos? Says the Mishnah Berurah. V'yachal likbaya b'leil Motzei Shabbos shetia chalitza b'yom rishon. After Shabbos, Motzei Shabbos, you could be kaver makom. Motzei Shabbos, Bezdin could get together and say, okay, we're being kaver makom for the chalitza that's going to take place tomorrow morning. Now, what's the chiddush of that? I mean, I understand you can't be kaver makom on Shabbos because it looks like you're being done on Shabbos. All right, but now you're talking about being kaver makom on Motzei Shabbos. Why should you not be able to be? Why should you have a havamina that you can't be kaver makom on Motzei Shabbos? The answer is because you're not allowed to be done at night. Bezdin is not in session at night, but that's only true by tchilas din. Bezdin is not allowed to begin a mishpat. Excuse me. Bezdin is not allowed to begin a mishpat at night. But if the mishpat was already begun, they could continue at night. But you're not maschil lodun. You don't begin a din at night. Now, we might have thought that being kavei amokim for a chalitza constitutes tchilas din. Maybe that's step one of the chalitza process. And if they do it Motzei Shabbos, that means that they're being maschil lodun. They're doing a tchilas din at night. Kamash Baruch in the Mishnah Berurah, no, that's not called tchilas din. The kviyas mokum, I think one of the Mefarshim use a lashon. It's like building the room where the chalitza is going to take place. The contractor is allowed to build the room. It's not the tchilas din. Being kaveh the mokum is not really an integral part of the din procedure. It's just a requirement. You have to be kaveh mokum. But it's not part of the din, therefore it doesn't constitute tchilas din, and you're allowed to do it at night. Continues the Mishnah Berurah, and he says also, afilu bebein hashmashos be'erev Shabbos al yom rishon im I efshar be'inyan acher. He also points out that if for some reason they're very pressured, I don't know exactly what the hechetimtza would be, why they're so pressured to be kaveh makom. But if there's a tzarich gadol that they have to be kaveh makom before Shabbos for a chalitza that's going to take place Yom Rishon on Sunday morning, then they could even be kaveh makom bein hashmashos Friday evening going into Shabbos. Why? Very simple. Because this is an Isid Rabbanon. This whole issue that you can't be done on Shabbos is Isid Rabbanon. And Isid Rabbanon, a shvus b'makom tzarich gadol, is mutter bein hashmashos going into Shabbos. So if it's a very pressing need, they could do the kviyas makom Friday evening during the bein hashmashos period going into Shabbos, and the Mishnah Berurah brought this down from the Pri Megadim in Sif Katan Gimel. Okay, next entry here in the Mechaber says the Mechaber v'loy miyabmin. Okay, we saw that you can't do chalitza. Well, what if there's not going to be a chalitza? What if the brother-in-law, right? What if he's actually going to take this woman in Yibum? He's going to be miyabim, the Yavama. Is he allowed to be miyabim the Yavama on Shabbos? Now, a Yavama, there's only one way to be kaina a Yavama. To affect the Yibum marriage, there's only one way to do it. You can't do it with kesef, you can't do it with shtar, there's no chuppah. In order to affect the Yibum marriage, there's only one way, and that is bia. That is, he has to live with her. So is he allowed to be kainas the Yavama on Shabbos? Is he allowed to do that? Says the Mechaber, no, v'loy miyabdin. And the Mishnah Berurah says in Ha'is Kal, very simple, why not? The b'masha b'yabim isa, when he lives with her and he's miyabim her, niknois lai, he acquires her, lihiyos ishtoi l'chol davar, kinesua mamish. Now she is married to him in every way. Ve'evik yekaina kinyan b'Shabbos. In that case, this is a mekach u'memkar issue. This is like you're doing a transaction on Shabbos. He's acquiring her. And when he lives with her to be miyabim her, he acquires her as a wife in every way. Should she pass away, he's going to be Yerush her. Should she find something, it's going to belong to him, etc., etc. So it's a full-fledged kinyan, and it is also b'derabbanan on Shabbos. And we're also afraid, now that he's marrying her, they might come to write a ksuba. So there's also a problem of gzeira, shema yikasev. Next entry. Ve'ein kainsin. You're also not allowed to make a chuppah. So if a man was mekadesh an isha on Thursday, or he's Mekadesh and Isha on Friday, or he was Mekadesh and Isha 6 months ago, and now they want to make Nisuin on Shabbos. So they'll make a chuppah, they'll make yichud, whatever it is, but they're going to make a Nisuin on Shabbos. You're not allowed to do that either. It says the Mishnah Berurah base. Even if the Kedushin was before Shabbos, also la'achnisa b'Shabbos l'chuppah, he can't bring her into the chuppah on Shabbos, which affects Nisuin. The b'chuppah kain ohisal kamed dvarim v'chanal, because once he makes Nisuin, he's being kain her. So again, we have a mekach u'memkar issue. Next entry says the Mechaber, v'loi makdishin. You're not allowed to be mekadesh anything, meaning you're not allowed to give something to hegdish. You're not allowed to take something and say, I raise a hegdish. You're being magdish at Lugavoya. You're giving it to the Beis Hamikdash. You're not allowed to be magdish things on Shabbos. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Iskar Chav Gimel, v'loi makdishin shum davar Lugavoya sheyomer harezu hegdish. You can't say, I'm making this item hegdish, that it should belong to the Beis Hamikdash. Why? Mishum dekevit shemagdish, when somebody is magdish something, ba'amirasai, with his verbal declaration. Somebody picks up something and he says, I am being magdish this ligavaya. All he did was a verbal declaration. But dekevit shemagdish ba'amirasai achevis lahegdish, harei moitzioi ba'amirazu achevis merishusai, l'rishus gavaya. The simple verbal declaration that you are making something hegdish removes that item from your rishus, and it brings it into hegdish's rishus. So you take something, you say, I'm being magdish this, it's no longer yours. You have just transferred it from your ownership to hegdish's ownership. Well, that's a mekach u'memkar problem. Now, if this was a transaction that was taking place between two people, this wouldn't be true. If somebody picks up something on Shabbos and says, this now, I'm giving this to Shimon. It's not Shimon's. It's not Shimon's until Shimon makes a kinyan. But by Hegdish, it's not that way. Hegdish does not have to make a kinyan. That's because of the rule, Amira legavaya kimisira lehedyet. A verbal declaration of transferring something to the property of Hegdish is equal to misira, is equal to giving something over with a kinyan to a non-Hegdish entity, to another person or something else. So the simple verbal declaration affects a transfer of ownership from you to Hegdish, and that's also on Shabbos. V'dami lemekach u'memkar. Masha ein kein lives like tzedakah la'amniya mutter, but it is mutter to pledge money to tzedakah. So you can make a Mishnah Berurah on Shabbos, and you could pledge money to tzedakah. Why? Because you're not affecting a transfer of ownership. When you make a Mishnah Berurah and you say, Ba'avur shenasan $100 lebeis hakneses, or l'tzedakah, and you pledge to give $100 to tzedakah, you're not affecting a transfer of ownership on that $100. The $100 doesn't leave your rishus and go to the tzedakah's rishus. All it is a pledge that you're going to do it, but you don't affect the transfer of ownership with your statement, and therefore that's mutter on Shabbos. V'chein similarly, kishayamar harei alai lihegdish kach v'kach. If somebody makes a pledge and he says, I am going to give Hegdish such and such, he's not giving it to Hegdish. He's not saying, I raise a Hegdish. When somebody says, I raise a Hegdish, he's saying, this is Hegdish. That's Amira L'Gavaya Kimisir L'Hedyet. But when somebody says, I'm going to give something to Hegdish, he didn't transfer the ownership yet. He just undertook that he is going to do it. He has to do it, but he didn't do it now. So he didn't affect the transfer of ownership. It's not mekach u'memkar. Gam ken mutter. Over there, the Chavetz Chaim has an interesting discussion about whether or not it would be appropriate if somebody wants to give a specific item to a shul. One of the examples he gives over there is a keser for a Torah. Somebody has one of those beautiful silver crowns that they put on the Sefer Torah. On Shabbos, he wants to say, I'm giving this to the shul, and now he's going to bring it to the shul. That, the Mishnah Berurah says, no. If it's a chayfetz miyuchad, if it's a specific item, you should not declare on Shabbos that you're giving that item to the shul. Make the declaration before Shabbos and then bring it on Shabbos. Next entry here in the Mishnah, in the Mechaber, v'loy ma'arichin. You're not allowed to give an erech. What's an erech? Says the Mishnah Berurah v'lo marichin sheyamar erki alai. That's where somebody says, I am giving my value to hegdish. Now this is a parsha in the Torah. Everybody has a set value when it comes to erechin. When somebody says erki alai, it depends on his gender, it depends on his age. He has a fixed value, and he has to give that amount to hegdish. You're not allowed to do that on Shabbos. Erech pliny alai, or someone says, I'm going to give the erech of Ruvain to hegdish. You can't do that. Again, to have a mekach umemkar. That's also a mekach umemkar issue. Next entry, v'loy macharimin. You're not allowed to make chermei gavaya, which is another form of hegdish. You're not allowed to take something and say, harei ze cherem legavaya. That means that you're being magdishit. You're not allowed to do that on Shabbos. And we'll do one more entry because the Mishnah Berurah put two together in one ois cotton. V'loy mafrishin trumas amaisris. You're not allowed to separate trumas and maisris, and we're going to see also challah. You're not allowed to separate trumas and maisris or challah on Shabbos, and you're not allowed to do charmei gavaya on Shabbos. Says the Mishnah Berurah kan chafei. V'loy macharimin. Behema, oishum davar ligavaya. You're not allowed to say harei zeh cherim legavaya. You're not allowed to give an animal as a cherim to hegdish, to bedek abayis, or anything else. It's another form of hegdish. Sheyomer harei davar zeh cherim. V'akol mitamanal, and it's all the same issue. It's all mekach umemkar. And when the Mechaber says he can't be mafresh trumas amaisris, why can't you be mafresh trumas amaisris? There's no malacha involved in being mafresh trumas amaisris. And also, how are you affecting any kind of mekach umemkar? When you're mafresh truma, you're separating truma, and once you separate the truma, you have to give the truma to the kohen. But you're not giving the truma to the kohen now. You're just separating it. When you separate meiser rishon, you have to give that meiser to a Levi. But when you separate it, you're not giving it to a Levi. By separating it, what are you doing? You're being misakein your produce. So you have produce, you have X amount of bushels of wheat. Right now it's tevel. You're not allowed to eat it because you haven't been mafresh trumas and maisris. So you want to separate the trumas and maisris so that now you could use your wheat. But you didn't yet give the trumas and maisris to the kohen or the Levi. So why is that a problem on Shabbos? Says the Mishnah Berurah, "V'loy mafrishin shu doime kemagdish oison peiros shehifresh." Because even though this is not hegdish, and again, you're not transferring any ownership, but it bears a similarity, right? When you give something to hegdish, you go, harei zeh hegdish. I'm giving this to hegdish. When you separate trumas and meiser, you say harei zeh truma, harei zeh meiser, and eventually you're going to have to give it away. So it bears enough of a resemblance to hegdish that Chazal answered that as well. But then the Mishnah Berurah says, the truth is, there's another problem. There's also a tikkun moneh issue here. You're being misakin your food. Like we said, you can't use the food now because it's tevel. But once you're mafresh to trumas and maisers, now you can use the produce. Even if you don't actually give the trumas and maisers to the kohen and to the Levi yet, doesn't matter. You're already allowed to use the produce that you were just misakin. So you're repairing something. You're taking produce that was not usable and you're rendering it usable. That's a problem on Shabbos. Says the Mishnah Berurah, avar v'hifresh, if somebody transgresses this prohibition and he is mafresh trumas and maisers on Shabbos, if he did it b'mezid lo yeyachel, then he's not allowed to eat it on Shabbos. Bein loy, the person who separated the trumas and maisers, is not allowed to eat from this food on Shabbos. Bein la'acherim, no one else is allowed to eat from this produce either. Ad motzai Shabbos, bitam knas. There's a knas. You aren't allowed to be mafresh trumas and maisers on Shabbos. You did. No one's allowed to use this produce now on Shabbos. But on Motzei Shabbos, it becomes mutter. If he did it b'shoigig, he forgot that it was Shabbos, or he forgot that there's such a locha that you're not allowed to be mafresh trumas and maisers, then mutter afilu loy miyad, then it's allowed to be used even immediately on Shabbos. This is a davar that's totally b'machloikis, ayin le'el siman shin yud ches sif aleph. The Mishnah Berurah over there, there's a Gra, there's a Magen Avram, but in any case, this is what the Mishnah Berurah writes over here, that if you are mafresh trumas and maisers b'mezid, it's not allowed to be used on Shabbos by anyone, it becomes mutter on Motzei Shabbos. You mafresh trumas and maisers b'shoigig, then anyone's allowed to use it even on Shabbos, even the person himself who is mafresh to trumas and maisers. Ois kan chafav trumas amaisus v'odin chala v'ayla el b'simin reish samechalaf b'Mishnah Berurah siv cotton dollar. Next entry in the Mechaber, third line down. Ve'ein paidin haben. You're not allowed to affect pidyon haben on Shabbos. So if the baby turns 1 month old, now on Shabbos, you're not allowed to do pidyon haben. You can't give the kohen the chamisha slaim and be paid to him and redeem him. You're not allowed to do it on Shabbos. Vein paidin, says the Mishnah Berurah, afilu b'kli sheshava chamisha slaim. You're not allowed to do this even if you avoid the muktzah issue. In other words, like this, you say to yourself, well, you can't do pidyon haben on Shabbos because you need the silver coins, and the coins are money. Money is muktzah. Says the Mishnah Berurah, it has nothing to do with muktzah. You're right, the coins are muktzah. But let's say you had a keli, you had a beautiful silver washing cup that's worth at least 5 slime. So the keli is not muktzah. So you want to give the keli to the kohen to be paid to the child. You're not allowed to do that either. Why? Again, there's an appearance of mekach umemkar. What is pidyon? Well, the kohen, so to speak, has some level of a claim on the child, and you're giving him the money to be paid to him. So it's a transaction that's going over here, right? I mean, what happens by pidyon haben? The father asks the kohen, what do you want more? Do you want the child or do you want the money? And the kohen says, I'll take the money. So you give him the money. So it's a transaction that's happening over here. This is a mekach umemkar issue. You're not allowed to do it. My boy is tvei. That's the lashon. My boy is tvei. Which one do you want more? Now you might think, okay, there's an eitzah of how you could affect pidyon haben on Shabbos. You know what you'll do? You'll give the chamisha slum to the kohen on Erev Shabbos. Now it's a day early. The child is not a full month old yet, so he's not royal pidyon yet. You're not allowed to do pidyon haben early, so you can't do pidyon haben now. But what you'll do is you'll give the kohen the chamisha slum on Erev Shabbos, so he has it already in his possession. Then when on Shabbos the baby turns a full month old, okay, now the pidyon will take effect. He has the money. And now, okay, the pidyon will take effect now. Says the Mishnah Berurah, you're not allowed to do that. When day 31 is on Shabbos, so that it's now, the baby's now a complete month old. He had a full 30 days. His full 30 days ended on Erev Shabbos. Now on Shabbos is day 31. Now it's the time to do the pidyon haben. Sha'ozuzman pidiyah yochol hapidyon. You're going to give him the money early and let the pidyon be chal on Shabbos, when the baby is royal opinion. Says the Mishnah Berurah, you can't do that. Why? Because now the father is not going to be able to make a bracha on the pidyon haben. You're going to be mevatel the brachas ha-mitzvah. Why? Because what are you going to do? The father can't make the bracha pidyon haben on Erev Shabbos when he gives the kohen the money, because you can't do pidyon haben on Erev Shabbos. The baby's not a month old yet. So how could you say v'tzivanu? You're not mitzvah in pidyon haben yet. So you can't say asher kedusharu b'mitzvah v'tzivanu. U'b'Shabbos dami lo yuchel avarich, and on Shabbos he can't make a bracha. Kevin she'azein no yiseklum. On Shabbos he's not doing anything. He already gave the money to the kohen on Erev Shabbos, so he's not doing anything. There's no ma'aseh mitzvah on Shabbos to make a bracha on. Lachein, therefore yamten achar Shabbos. Therefore you have to wait until after Shabbos. Va'afilu kaluloi be'erev Shabbos chaf tes yoim v'yud beis shois v'tov shin tzadik gimel chalokim misha shehu misha. Let's say on erev Shabbos the baby already turned 29 days, 12 hours, and 793 chalokim. What are chalokim? In halacha, every hour is divided into 1,080 equal chalokim. You can see that in the parentheses here. There's 1,080 chalokim in an hour. Now, what's going on here? The Mishnah Berurah is saying like this. Let's say if you do the math, you take a look, you looked at the clock at labor and delivery, so you know exactly to the minute when the baby was born. Now you wait 29 days, 12 hours, and 793 chalokim from the moment that the baby was born. What's the yachas of that amount of time? Says the Mishnah Berurah, Shehu ha'cheshbon shel kol chodesh im yischalek hashana liyud beis chalokim b'shaveh. If you take a lunar year and you divide a lunar year into 12 exactly equal portions, so you want to make 12 lunar months, but you're not worrying about the Moilad Halavana, everything else. You're just working with time. You want to take 354 days. You want to take a lunar year, and you want to divide it into 12 equal parts. Each one of those equal parts will be 29 days, 12 hours, and 793 chalakim. So says the Mishnah Berurah, the father of this baby looks at the calendar, and he sees that on Erev Shabbos, his baby is going to be 29 days, 12 hours, and 793 chalakim old. So now he wants to do the Pidyon Haben on Erev Shabbos. He doesn't want to wait till Shabbos. He knows he can't do the Pidyon Haben on Shabbos. So, the Rav looked at the calendar, and the Rav said, the Pidyon Haben falls out on Shabbos, because Shabbos is day 31. But the father says, I can't do the Pidyon Haben on Shabbos. I'm going to have to wait till Sunday. I don't want to wait till Sunday. Ein machmitzin is a mitzvah. We don't want to, we want, it's the reason like demon. We want to do the mitzvah as soon as possible. So he's a mathematician, the guy. And he looks at the calendar, and he says, wait a second. It's true that Shabbos is day 31. But the fact is that on Erev Shabbos, the baby will be 29 days, 12 hours, 793 chalakim old. So technically, he's a full month old. So let me do the Pidyon Haben on Erev Shabbos at 29 days, 12 hours, and 795 chalakim. So the baby's already really a month old. Says the Mishnah Berurah, you can't do that. Why? Because that's not the way a month works in halacha. When it comes to a din Torah like Pidyon Haben, a month is not 29 days, 12 hours, and 793 chalakim. A month is 30 complete days. So you have to wait till day 31. The Pidyon Haben has to take place on day 31. And since it falls out on Shabbos, you have to push it off, you have to postpone the Pidyon Haben until Sunday. Okay, next entry here in Sif Daled, says the Mechaber, Ve'ein Megarshin, you're not allowed to perform a get, a divorce on Shabbos. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Eiskan Chavches, Ve'ein Megarshin. Now, really, when you think of doing a get, so right away you'll say to yourself, well, you can't do a get on Shabbos because, what do you mean? The cost of law sefer krisus. You got to write a get. You can't write a get on Shabbos. That would be an Issa Malacha Daraisa. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Afilu beget shenichtav kaid b'Shabbos. You can't make a get on Shabbos even if the get was actually written on Erev Shabbos. Now right away you can have a problem. Wait a second. How could a get be written on Erev Shabbos and be given on Shabbos? That's going to be two different dates, right? Erev Shabbos is going to be one date, and then that day is going to be over when Shabbos begins. So the get is going to be given on a different date. And the get has to have a zman. It has to have a time, a date on it. And you're not allowed to use a get muktam. A get that's dated a day before the get actually took place is also, you're not allowed to use it. So how are you going to make gerushin with a get that was written on Erev Shabbos? Says the Mishnah Berurah, no, it is possible to do it. I feel a beget shenichtav kaid Shabbos shemayavel iksiva. Oh, sorry, the Mishnah Berurah himself doesn't explain it. The explanation of this is that technically it's not lechatchila, but you could write a get where you write the right. You can have a get where you don't write. Where you write the month and not, let me look this up quickly. I think so. Oh, the Mishnah Berurah is going to say this. It's going to be in the next Mishnah Berurah. Let's see the next Mishnah Berurah. So first, let's go back to the Mechaber. So the Mechaber said, "V'lo megarshin," you're not allowed to give a get. But now the Mechaber gives a carve out. There is a case where you are allowed to give a get. Eliim kenu get shchiv meira detokafle alma. You know when you are allowed to perform a get on Shabbos? If you had never have a husband who's on his deathbed and the couple's childless. So if the husband dies without giving his wife a get, the wife is going to fall for Yibum. She's going to fall for Yibum. She's not allowed to marry anybody until she gets Chalitza. What if there ends up being a problem over here? So they really want to avoid the woman falling to Yibum. So he wants desperately to give his wife a get before he dies. He's in the ICU, and they say this guy who's only got a couple of hours left on Shabbos. He wants to give her a get. So then you're allowed to do the get on Shabbos. He wants to give his wife a get so she shouldn't fall for Yibum if he dies. We're matter him to give a get on Shabbos. Why are we allowing this? We're not allowing this to help the woman. That's not why we're allowing it. We're allowing it because this person who's on his deathbed is going to get very agitated. He wants desperately to give the get to his wife to save her from falling to Yibum. If you're going to tell him he can't, he's going to get agitated, and that might kill him. So in order to avoid that, we're matter him giving the get on Shabbos. Now, explains the Mishnah Berurah, but again, it can't be that we're writing the get on Shabbos, and if we wrote the get on Erev Shabbos, how is it not a get muktam? Says the Mishnah Berurah, no, it's not a get muktam. Kigoin, shekishenichtav a get Erev Shabbos, loy nichtav by zman hayoim. They didn't write the day, elakasav by shavua zu stam. So they wrote which week of the month the get took place in, but they didn't write the day. The kosher b'kai gav the commercial kosher be'evan ezer siman kuf chav zayin siv zayin. B'di'evid, such a get would be kosher. Okay, let's end off the sif over here. It says the Mechaber, V'chulam im nasu shoygigin oy mezidin oy mutin masha asay asay. In all of these cases that we just had since the beginning of Sif Dalet, if one of these things that you're not allowed to do on Shabbos was done, whether they did it b'mezid or they did it out of a mistake, doesn't matter. Whether it was a shoygig, a mezid, a mutayin, masha asay asay. Whatever they did is going to take effect. Says the Mishnah Berurah Kat Lamed, Akar Lamavur b'Sif Zekoi, it goes back on everything in this Sif. Chutz me'afrashas trumas ha'maisris, the b'yarnu la'el dem ifrishim b'mezid also by b'yoyim. So what the Mishnah Berurah is saying is, anything that we had here in this Sif ain't done in. You're not allowed to make a din. But if Bezdin was done and they issued a psak, the psak is going to hold. All of these things, you made a chuppah v'kiddushin. You weren't allowed to, but someone got married on Shabbos. The marriage is a marriage. The woman is going to be considered fully married. There was a Yavama, and the Yavam lived with the Yavama on Shabbos, and he was machnis her. That's it. Harehi ishtar l'chol davar. She's fully married to him. He wasn't allowed to do it, but it's going to take effect. You gave something to Hegdish, it belongs to Hegdish. You weren't allowed to do it, but it's going to take effect. All of these things will take effect. They're going to be effective, except for one. But even that one really is effective. The Mechaber said you're not allowed to be mafresh trumas amaisris. You are mafresh trumas amaisris on Shabbos. The truma that you are mafresh is going to be truma. The maisris that you are mafresh are meiser. But you're not allowed to use the food until after Shabbos, like we learned earlier. What do we mean over here by shoygigin? Shoygig means you forgot that it was Shabbos, or you forgot that it was usher to do this thing. We're going to stop over here, even though we have quite a bit of Mishnah Berurah left on this page. But if you look at Kuf Pei Zayin Amud Aleph, you'll see that Kuf Pei Zayin Amud Aleph is rather tiny. So we're going to stop over here, and we will do the rest of today's Mishnah Berurah and tomorrow's page tomorrow. Thank you so much for joining me for Liban HaTorah. The discussion of Liban HaTorah should be megan against Klal Yisrael. The Rebbeinu Shalom should send Yeshua Serfuas Panot and Shidduchim to those in need. We should be zeicher to see the BS God Tzedek B'mher V'Yameinu Amen. Be well.